I wasn't looking for another woman. That's the first thing you should know. It was a vow I had sealed in the quiet, hollow space Chloe left behind. A promise written on the back of unpaid therapy bills and tear-stained pillowcases. My life, I had decided, would be a fortress of solitude built from academic abstracts and the dust of forgotten archives. Love, especially the kind that came with soft hands and a voice that could unravel me, was a language I was determined to forget. The university library, with its hushed reverence and the faint, sweet smell of decaying paper, was my chosen monastery. Here, among the silent stacks, the only passion I would entertain was for my doctoral thesis on late medieval urban planning. It was safe, it was controllable, it was mine. The air in the graduate reading room was thick with the scent of old wood, stale coffee, and the low-grade anxiety of 20 other academics pretending they weren't on the verge of a complete breakdown. I was hunched over a facsimile of a 14th century land grant, tracing the faded ink with a gloved finger, when Professor Albright cleared his throat at the front of the room. His voice, a dry crackle like autumn leaves, sliced through the studious silence. A brief announcement before you all scurry back to your respective holes, he began, a ghost of a smile playing on his thin lips. Regarding the final project proposal, I've been reviewing your preliminary outlines, and frankly, some of you are operating in intellectual echo chambers. A collective wince rippled through the room. Therefore, I am instituting a mandatory peer partnership for the final 10,000-word submission. You will critique, challenge, and fortify one another's arguments. Your partner's evaluation will constitute 15% of your final grade. A low groan met his words. My stomach plummeted. A partner. The last thing I wanted was to entangle my work, my sanctuary, with someone else's chaos. I just wanted to be left alone. I have already assigned the pairings based on complementary research areas, he continued, oblivious to our shared misery. He began reading from a list, each name a small sentence of doom. Miller and Chen, Rodriguez and Kim. I held my breath, praying for a ghost, someone who never showed up to class. And finally, Albright said, peering over his spectacles, Thorne and Koval. I looked up, my blood running cold. Thorne, Elara Thorne. That was me. But Koval? I scanned the room, my eyes landing on her almost immediately, as if drawn by some invisible string. Anya Koval. She was sitting by the large arched window, the afternoon light catching the strands of copper in her dark brown hair, which she had pulled back in a loose, messy knot. She wasn't a stranger, not really. We'd been in the same program for 2 years, orbiting each other in seminars and department meetings, but we had never spoken a word. She was quiet, self-contained, with an intensity in her gaze that always made me feel vaguely transparent. She looked up from her book, her eyes, a startlingly clear shade of gray, like a storm-washed sky, meeting mine from across the room. There was no panic in her expression, no annoyance, just a calm, steady acknowledgement. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, then returned to her page. The gesture was so simple, so unnervingly serene. It felt less like an introduction and more like a quiet declaration. My fortress, it seemed, was about to have a visitor, and I had a dreadful sinking feeling that the walls I'd built were not nearly as strong as I had believed. Our first meeting was a study in polite, sterile distance. We convened at a small table in the corner of a campus coffee shop that buzzed with the frantic energy of undergraduates. The air smelled of burnt espresso and sugar. I arrived 5 minutes early, my laptop open, my notes arranged in a neat defensive perimeter. I was determined to establish the tone, professional, efficient, and entirely impersonal. This was a transaction, an academic necessity, not an invitation for friendship. Anya arrived precisely on time. She moved with a fluid grace that seemed at odds with the clatter and chaos of the cafe. She wore a simple gray sweater, the wool soft-looking, and dark jeans. Her only adornment was a thin silver ring on her index finger. She placed her worn leather satchel on the floor and sat opposite me, offering a small, polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ilara," she said. Her voice was lower than I'd expected, a calm alto, with a subtle warmth that vibrated in the air between us. "Anya," I replied, my own voice sounding clipped and brittle in comparison. "Thanks for meeting me." "Of course." She pulled out a notebook and a single elegant fountain pen. "Where should we start? Your work on guild-based property development in Bruges is fascinating. The way you're linking it to social capital feels new." I was momentarily thrown. She'd actually read my outline. Thoroughly. "Right, well, your analysis of Venetian maritime law and its influence on port architecture is comprehensive." It was the best I could muster. Her work was more than comprehensive. It was brilliant, nuanced, and written with a clarity that I secretly envied. Admitting that felt like a concession I wasn't prepared to make. "I think our topics have an interesting point of intersection," she said, her gray eyes focused and serious. "The tension between private enterprise and public space, how the physical layout of a city reflects its legal and economic soul." "Yes, the foundational structures," I agreed, latching onto the academic safety of the topic. For the next hour, we talked only of work. I kept my posture rigid, my hands clasped around my lukewarm mug, my gaze fixed on my laptop screen or my notes. Anywhere but on her. But it was a losing battle. My senses seemed to betray me, cataloging details I had no business noticing. The scent that clung to her, a subtle mix of sandalwood and old paper, like the inside of a rare book. The way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, her fingers long and deft. The deliberate, unhurried way she uncapped her pen, the small click echoing in the space between us. I tried to push back, to maintain my carefully constructed distance. When she asked a question that veered even slightly toward the personal, "Have you ever been to Venice?" I shut it down with a curt, "No, I've only seen it in photographs." I offered no follow-up, no reciprocal inquiry. I created a conversational dead end and stared at it, daring her to try again. She didn't. She simply nodded and smoothly redirected the conversation back to 15th century shipping lanes. Her patience was unnerving. It felt less like politeness and more like a quiet, unassailable strength. Chloe would have called me out on my coldness. She would have poked and prodded, turning my defensiveness into a dramatic fight. Anya just waited. She met my resistance not with pressure, but with space. It was infuriating. It made my rudeness feel loud and childish. "I think we have a solid plan for the next few weeks," she said finally, capping her pen. "We should probably book a room in the archives for next week. Work with the primary source ledgers." "Fine," I said. "I'll handle it." I wanted to prove my competence, to reestablish my independence. "Okay." She gathered her things, her movements efficient and graceful. "Friday, then?" "Friday." She stood, slinging her satchel over her shoulder. For a moment, her eyes met mine, and I saw something flicker in their gray depths. Not pity, not frustration, but a kind of thoughtful curiosity. It was the look of someone piecing together a puzzle. I felt a hot flush of anger and embarrassment. I didn't want to be a puzzle. I didn't want to be figured out. "Have a good afternoon, Ilara," she said, her voice still infuriatingly calm. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the throng of students, leaving me alone with my fortress, whose walls suddenly felt thin and fragile, like paper. The scent of sandalwood lingered faintly in the air, a ghost of a presence I couldn't seem to banish. I had wanted distance, and she had given it to me, yet I felt an unsettling sense of loss, a quiet ache for a connection I had actively, determinedly sabotaged. The archives were a tomb of silence, cold and smelling of acid-free paper and time itself. We were given a small oak table in a secluded carrel, hemmed in by towering shelves of gray archival boxes. The space was tight, forcing a proximity that felt both clinical and intensely intimate. Our elbows brushed when we reached for the same reference book. I could feel the warmth radiating from her arm, a stark contrast to the chilled air of the room. I spent the first hour hyper-aware of her presence, of the soft sound of her breathing, the whisper of her woolen sleeve against the polished wood of the table. Our work required us to handle massive, leather-bound ledgers, their pages brittle with age. They were too heavy for one person to maneuver safely, so we had to work together, our heads bent close over the spidery faded script. Her hair, which she'd worn down today, fell forward, a curtain of dark silk. The scent of sandalwood and paper was stronger here, more concentrated, and it was starting to feel less like an observation and more like a permanent part of my own sensory landscape. "Look at this," she murmured, her voice a low hum that seemed to vibrate right through the table. She pointed a slender finger at a notation in the margin. Her nail was short and unpolished, clean and practical. "It's a bill of lading for spices, but the clerk has added a personal note. God save my brother from the sea and the corsairs." I leaned closer, my shoulder pressing against hers for a brief moment. The fabric of her sweater was soft, just as I'd imagined. I forced my attention to the page. "It humanizes it," I said, my voice sounding strained. "It's not just cargo. It's a family's livelihood. A prayer." "Exactly," she said, her gray eyes lifting from the page to meet mine. We were inches apart. I could see the flecks of blue and green in her irises, the faint dusting of freckles across the bridge of her nose. The air crackled. The silence of the archive deepened, pressing in on us. I felt a sudden, dizzying urge to lean in, to close the small space between us, and it terrified me. I pulled back abruptly, clearing my throat. "We should document the folio number." My tone was all business, a desperate attempt to rebuild the wall she so effortlessly breached. Anya didn't call attention to the moment. She simply nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in her expression, and made a note. Her composure was a quiet marvel. It was also, I was beginning to realize, a form of kindness. She saw my panic, my retreat, and she allowed it. She gave me the space I claimed to want, even as every cell in my body seemed to be screaming for the opposite. We worked for hours. The sun shifted, sending long, dusty shafts of light through the high, narrow windows. My initial rigidity began to dissolve under the weight of shared focus and exhaustion. The work was engrossing, and Anya was an incredible partner. She saw patterns I missed, made connections that were both surprising and obvious in retrospect. Our ideas began to weave together, creating a tapestry richer than either of us could have woven alone. My defenses were eroding, grain by grain. I found myself watching her hands as she carefully turned a fragile page, the movements precise and respectful. I listened to the way she'd hum under her breath when she was deep in thought, a tuneless, contented sound. Late in the afternoon, my stomach growled, a loud, mortifying rumble in the profound silence. I felt my face flush with color. Anya looked up from the ledger, and for the first time, the smile that touched her lips was genuine. It transformed her face, softening the serious lines around her mouth and making her eyes sparkle. "Is that a historical document protesting its confinement?" she asked, her tone dry. Despite myself, a laugh escaped me. A real, honest laugh. It felt rusty, like a piece of machinery that hadn't been used in months. "I think it's demanding tribute, in the form of carbohydrates." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a slightly squashed paper bag. "I can offer a scone," she said, her smile widening. "It's apple and cinnamon." a bit battered from the journey, but noble of heart. The absurdity of it, the simple, unexpected kindness, broke through the last of my resistance for the day. I took the scone she offered, our fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. It was a jolt, a tiny spark of electricity that shot up my arm. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice softer than I intended. We ate in silence, the scone a sweet, crumbly truce between us. The tension hadn't vanished, but it had changed. It was no longer the sharp friction of two strangers forced together. It was something else now, something warmer and more complex. A low hum of awareness that was both unsettling and undeniably compelling. I was in her space, sharing her food, breathing her air. And the terrifying truth was, I didn't want to leave. The storm arrived without warning. One moment, the late afternoon sun was slanting through the high library windows. The next, the sky had bruised to a deep, dramatic purple. A sudden gust of wind rattled the old window frames, and a low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. We had been working for nearly 10 hours, fueled by the terrible scone and a shared obsessive focus. My brain felt like a sponge, oversaturated and useless. Every line of 15th century script had begun to blur into an incomprehensible scrawl. "I think my brain is officially full," I said, rubbing my temples. "I can't read another word about wool tariffs." Anya stretched, arching her back like a cat. The movement was unconsciously graceful, and I found myself watching the way her sweater pulled taut across her shoulders. "I agree. We should pack up." As if on cue, the lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the archives into a deep twilight. The only illumination came from the emergency exit signs at either end of the long hall, casting a faint, eerie green glow. Outside, the rain began to fall in earnest, a hard, percussive drumming against the roof. The thunder cracked again, closer this time, a sound so loud it seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. "Well," Anya said into the sudden darkness. Her voice was a calm anchor in the disorienting gloom. "That complicates things." My heart, which had leaped into my throat at the sudden blackout, began to settle. No kidding. I fumbled for my phone, its screen, a blinding beacon in the dark. The battery was at 4%, of course. "There's a backup generator, but it only powers the main corridors and the emergency systems," Anya said. "The stacks will stay dark." She sounded as if she were reciting from a manual, her composure absolute. I, on the other hand, felt a familiar, unwelcome prickle of anxiety. I hated storms. I hated the dark. I hated the feeling of being trapped. "We just have to wait it out, I guess," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I have a flashlight in my bag," she said. A moment later, a thin, steady beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating her face. She looked serene, unbothered. She handed it to me. "Here, you look like you need it more than I do." I took it, my fingers brushing hers in the exchange. That spark again. Stronger this time. "Thanks." We sat in the near darkness, the sound of the storm, a constant roar outside. The professional boundary that we had so carefully maintained felt absurd in this context. We weren't colleagues anymore. We were just two people sitting at a table, surrounded by the ghosts of history and the fury of the weather. The silence stretched, filled only by the rain and the distant, reassuring hum of the generator. "It's been a difficult year," I heard myself say. The words came out of nowhere, a crack in the dam I'd so carefully constructed. I hadn't meant to say them, hadn't even known I was thinking them. But there they were, hanging in the dark, charged air between us. Anya didn't respond immediately. She just sat there, a still silhouette in the gloom. I was instantly mortified. bracing myself for a polite but dismissive platitude, or worse, an awkward attempt to pry. I shouldn't have said anything. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said finally. Her voice was soft, devoid of pity. It was a simple statement of fact, an acknowledgement of my words. She wasn't pushing for more. She was just listening. The simplicity of her response disarmed me. Chloe would have made it about her, about how my sadness affected her. My sister would have offered a dozen unsolicited, unhelpful solutions. Anya just let my statement exist. "It's just a lot," I added, the confession a quiet whisper. "The thesis and other things." The other things was a continent of pain, the vast empty space left by Chloe, a relationship that had ended not with a bang, but with the slow, corrosive acid of contempt. Chloe had loved the idea of me, the smart, ambitious academic. But the real me, the anxious, insecure, quiet me, was a constant disappointment. "You're not good at this," she'd told me during our last fight, gesturing vaguely at our shared life, our shared bed. At us. The words had burrowed deep. "The pressure in these programs is immense," Anya said, her voice still calm and steady. "It's designed to make you feel like you're constantly on the verge of failing." She was giving me an out, a way to steer the conversation back to the safety of academic stress. I could take it. I should take it, but I didn't want to. For the first time in a long time, I felt the dangerous, seductive pull of being truly seen. "It's more than that," I said, my voice barely audible over the rain. I feel like I'm not very good at connection, at us." The echo of Chloe's words slipped out, a ghost in the dark. I waited, my body tense for the inevitable retreat, the polite shift in conversation. But it didn't come. Anya just sat there, a quiet presence in the storm, letting the silence hold the weight of my admission. She didn't try to fix it. She didn't try to explain it away. She simply shared the darkness with me, and in doing so, made it feel a little less lonely. The storm raged for another hour, but its violence felt distant now, external. Inside our small pocket of darkness, a different kind of quiet had settled. Anya eventually found a half-eaten bag of almonds in her satchel, and we shared them, our hands occasionally meeting in the bag. Each touch was a small, significant event. After my quiet, fragmented confession, the silence between us was no longer empty. It was filled with a nascent, fragile trust. When Anya spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. "I used to think patience was a passive thing," she said, her words seeming to emerge from the darkness itself. "Just waiting for something to happen. But it's not. It's an action. It's the work of holding space for things to unfold at their own pace, academically, personally." I processed her words. It wasn't advice, not directly, but it felt like a key, a small piece of her own philosophy offered up in exchange for my vulnerability. She was telling me how she saw the world, and she was telling me, without saying it, that she was willing to be patient with me. "I failed my master's qualifying exams the first time I took them," she continued, her voice even. "Spectacularly. I'd never failed at anything academic in my life. I thought my world was over. I locked myself in my apartment for 3 days, convinced I was a fraud, and my career was finished before it began." I was stunned into silence. Anya, the brilliant, composed Anya Koval, had failed? It seemed impossible. "What did you do?" I whispered. "On the 4th day," she said, a hint of dry humor in her tone. "I ran out of coffee, so I had to go outside. And the world was still there. The sun was out. My favorite cafe was still serving croissants. It was infuriatingly normal." She paused. "It taught me that failure isn't a destination. It's just a data point. It tells you what to do differently next time. So, the next time I studied differently, I asked for help and I learned to breathe. She shared this story so calmly, a simple offering of her own past fallibility. It wasn't a story of triumph, but one of quiet resilience. It was a piece of herself, offered to balance the small broken piece I had shown her. This was reciprocity. This was the foundation of trust being laid, stone by careful stone. Just then, from her satchel, she produced a small silver thermos. "I have tea," she said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Chamomile. It's probably lukewarm by now, but it's better than nothing." She poured the tea into the thermos's small cup lid and handed it to me. My fingers wrapped around the plastic, which was still surprisingly warm. The steam that rose from it carried the faint sweet scent of chamomile and honey. The simple domestic act of care felt monumental in the cold, dark archive. It was a gesture of profound kindness, a shield against the storm both outside and within me. I took a sip. The tea was warm and soothing, and it felt like grace. "Thank you," I said, and this time the words were full. They carried the weight of the scone, of the flashlight, of her patience, of her story. They were heavy with a gratitude that felt dangerously close to something else, something I had sworn I would never feel again. When the lights finally flickered back on an hour later, the harsh fluorescent glare felt like an intrusion. The world rushed back in. The rows of books, the polished tables, the hum of the ventilation. We blinked at each other in the sudden brightness, like two creatures startled from a shared dream. The spell was broken, but something had irrevocably shifted between us. We packed our bags in a new kind of silence, one that was no longer awkward or strained, but comfortable, imbued with the easy intimacy of a shared secret. We were no longer just study partners. We were two people who had weathered a storm together. A few days later, the project demanded another long session. The library was booked solid, so Anya suggested we work at her apartment. "It's small," she'd warned over email, "and there are books everywhere. A legitimate tripping hazard." I agreed, my heart performing a nervous staccato against my ribs. Going to her home felt like crossing a significant, unspoken boundary. It was a step from the public sphere into the private, and I was both terrified and desperate to take it. Her apartment was on the top floor of a charming old house with a creaky wooden staircase. Just as she'd said, it was small, but it was cozy and warm, and filled with light from a large bay window. And books. They weren't just on shelves. They were in neat stacks on the floor, on the coffee table, on the windowsill. The air smelled of her, that familiar, comforting scent of sandalwood and paper. But here it was mixed with the smell of brewing coffee and something green and alive. Dozens of plants hung in macrame holders or sat perched on bookshelves, their leaves trailing down like small green waterfalls. It was a space that felt deeply, authentically her, calm, intelligent, and quietly beautiful. "Coffee?" she asked, taking my coat. "Please," I said, my voice a little breathless. We settled on the floor, spreading our notes and books across a soft, faded kilim rug. The formality of our previous meetings evaporated completely in the warmth of her living room. We worked easily, falling into a rhythm that felt both productive and deeply comfortable. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Time seemed to slow down. At some point, we hit a wall, a contradictory reference in two primary sources that we couldn't reconcile. The book we needed was on a low shelf in her overflowing bookcase, tucked behind a potted fern. "I think it's in the red one," I said, pointing. "The collection of guild charters." "Right," she said. We both leaned forward at the same time, reaching for the same crimson spine. It happened in slow motion, her hand moving with its usual quiet grace, my own, hesitant and clumsy. We reached the book simultaneously. Her fingers were cool against mine, the backs of our hands pressing together, my palm against her knuckles. It wasn't a brush, it was a connection. Solid, unmistakable. A current, hot and sharp, shot up my arm straight to my chest, where it exploded like a firework. Every nerve ending in my body went on high alert. The world narrowed to that single point of contact. The texture of her skin, the warmth of my own, the solid spine of the book beneath our hands. We both froze. My breath caught in my throat. I lifted my gaze from our joined hands to her face. Her gray eyes were wide, her lips slightly parted. The calm, composed mask she usually wore had vanished, and in its place was a raw, unguarded vulnerability that mirrored my own. I saw it all there. The surprise, the question, the same startling jolt of recognition that was currently short-circuiting my own brain. Neither of us moved. The silence in the room was absolute, a heavy velvet curtain that had fallen around us. The only sound was the frantic drumming of my own pulse in my ears. The air grew thick, charged with everything we hadn't said for weeks. It was all there. The shared scone, the conversation in the dark, the dozens of small, stolen glances across the library table. It had all been leading to this touch, to this moment of shattering, undeniable truth. This wasn't friendship, this wasn't academic camaraderie, this was something else entirely. My mind was screaming at me to pull away, to make a joke, to shatter the tension and retreat to the safety of denial. It was the sensible thing to do, the safe thing. It was what the Alara who had built a fortress and sworn off women would do. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, mesmerized by the look in her eyes, by the feeling of her skin against mine. A part of me, a part I thought I had buried for good, was uncurling from its defensive crouch, stretching toward her like a plant toward the sun. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds, she, slowly, deliberately, uncurled her fingers from the book, but she didn't pull her hand away. Instead, her touch softened, her fingers gently tracing the line of my knuckles for a breathtaking instant, before she finally drew back. The loss of contact was a physical ache. My hand felt cold, empty. She sat back on her heels, her gaze dropping to the floor. A faint blush colored her cheeks. "Sorry," she whispered, the word barely audible. "Don't be," I whispered back, my own voice shaky. The book remained on the shelf, forgotten. The argument we were trying to solve no longer mattered. A far more important, far more terrifying question now hung in the air between us, and neither of us had any idea how to answer it. The moments after the touch were excruciating. We retreated to opposite sides of the rug, the 3 feet of space between us feeling like a vast, yawning chasm. We tried to return to the work, but the words on the page were meaningless. The delicate ecosystem of our partnership had been fundamentally altered. The air was still thick with unspoken energy, and every small movement, every shift in weight, every quiet breath felt amplified, significant. My entire consciousness was focused on her, on the subtle flush that remained on her cheeks, the way she kept tucking her hair behind her ear, a nervous gesture I'd never seen from her before. "I could order a pizza," she said finally, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Her gaze was fixed on the floorboards. "Yeah," I said, latching onto the suggestion like a lifeline. "Pizza sounds good." Normalcy. We were grasping for normalcy. But there was nothing normal about the way my heart was hammering against my ribs, or the way I couldn't stop replaying the feeling of her skin against mine. The pizza arrived, and we ate it sitting on the floor, the box a flimsy cardboard barrier between us. But the barrier was failing. We were sitting closer than we had to, our knees almost touching. The charged awareness hadn't dissipated. It had simply settled, becoming a low, constant hum beneath the surface of our conversation about toppings and the merits of thin crust. I was watching her talk, mesmerized by the way the evening light from the window caught in her hair, when a stray strand fell across her cheek. Without thinking, my hand moved on its own. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly, and gently tucked it behind her ear. It was a ghost of a touch, my fingertips barely grazing her skin, but it was enough. She stopped talking mid-sentence, her breath hitching. Her eyes met mine, and the raw vulnerability from before was back tenfold. Her skin was so soft. I let my fingers linger for a second too long on the shell of her ear, a silent, desperate question. Her eyes darkened, and she leaned into my touch. Just a fraction of an inch, a barely perceptible movement that was a clear and unequivocal answer. My stomach swooped. This was it. This was the precipice. And then my phone buzzed, a harsh, unwelcome intrusion. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. The screen lit up with a name that made my blood run cold. Brenna, my older sister. "I have to take this," I mumbled, my voice hoarse. I scrambled to my feet and walked over to the bay window, turning my back to Anya, needing the illusion of privacy. "Alara?" Brenna's voice was sharp, laced with her usual brand of concerned disapproval. "Just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a while. Are you still buried in that library? Or have you decided to rejoin the living?" "I'm fine, Brenna, just busy," I said, my voice tight. I was acutely aware of Anya behind me, of her stillness, of her listening. "Busy is good, as long as it's the right kind of busy," she said, and I knew what was coming. "You're not, getting distracted, are you? After Chloe, I just worry. You have a tendency to make things more complicated than they need to be. Your track record isn't exactly stellar in that department." Every word was a carefully aimed dart. She wasn't just talking about relationships. She was talking about my relationships with women. The unspoken judgment was deafening. This phase you're going through, this difficult path you've chosen. To my family, my queerness wasn't an identity. It was a problematic hobby, a recurring character flaw that led to messy, dramatic outcomes. Chloe had been the spectacular, validating proof of their theory. "I know what I'm doing," I snapped, my old defenses slamming into place. "I hope so, Alara, I really do. That doctorate is your ticket. Don't throw it away over some fleeting feeling." I ended the call, my hands shaking with a toxic cocktail of anger and shame. Brenna's words echoed in my head, reinforcing every fear, every insecurity Chloe had so expertly cultivated. "You're not good at this. You make things complicated. Fleeting feelings." I turned around. Anya was standing now, her expression etched with concern. She had heard. Maybe not the words, but she had heard the tone. She had seen the way I crumpled. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice soft. "It's fine," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. I started gathering my things, shoving notebooks into my bag with jerky, frantic movements. "It's getting late. I should go. We can finish this some other time." Flee. The instinct was overwhelming. Run back to the fortress, bar the doors. The risk was too great. The memory of Chloe's dismissal, amplified by my sister's casual cruelty, was a fresh gaping wound. I couldn't do this. I couldn't be this vulnerable with another woman, only to have it all fall apart again. I couldn't bear being proven right, or rather, being proven to be the failure everyone seemed to expect me to be. "Alara," Anya said, her voice gentle but firm. She took a step toward me. "Wait." I froze, my back still to her, my hand clutching the strap of my bag. I couldn't look at her. I couldn't let her see the panic, the sheer, gut-wrenching terror in my eyes. Because if she saw it, she might understand it. And if she understood it, she might leave. Or worse, She might stay, and I would eventually, inevitably, destroy this beautiful, fragile thing that was growing between us. Anya didn't press. She didn't demand an explanation. She simply stood there, a few feet away, her quiet presence a challenge to my panicked retreat. She was holding space, just as she'd said, holding it for me. And the terrifying, heartbreaking truth was that I wanted nothing more than to turn around and fall into it. Ilara, talk to me. Anya's voice was a soft plea, cutting through the frantic static in my head. I couldn't. I shook my head, my eyes squeezed shut. I can't, I whispered. My carefully constructed walls were crumbling, and I was terrified of what lay beneath the rubble. It was easier to run, to retreat to the familiar misery of solitude, than to risk the cataclysm of another failed connection. Okay, she said, and the simple acceptance in that single word broke me. A sob escaped my throat, a ragged, ugly sound. My carefully maintained composure shattered into a million pieces. My bag slipped from my shoulder and landed on the floor with a soft thud. I sank down onto the rug, wrapping my arms around myself as if to hold my fracturing self together. The shame was a physical weight crushing me. I felt, rather than saw, her move. She knelt in front of me, not touching, but her presence was a warm, solid thing in my chaotic world. You don't have to talk, she said gently. Just breathe. But the words were already spilling out, a torrent of fear and pain that I had held back for more than a year. I told myself I wouldn't do this again, I choked out, the words tangled with sobs. I'm not good at it. With women. With anyone, I break things. I make everything a mess. The echoes of Chloe and Brenna, a poisonous chorus in my mind. She said I was too much and not enough all at the same time. And she was right. I tried so hard to be what she wanted, and I erased myself completely. And she still left. I finally looked up at her, my vision blurred with tears. I can't go through that again. I can't be that person again. The one who waits by the phone and apologizes for breathing too loud. I can't. Anya listened, her gray eyes holding mine. There was no pity in her gaze, only a profound, unwavering empathy. She didn't offer platitudes. She didn't tell me I was wrong. She just listened, bearing witness to my confession, to the ugly, terrified core of me. When I finally fell silent, exhausted and empty, she slowly reached out and took my hand. Her touch was firm, grounding. Her thumbs stroked the back of my hand, a small, repetitive motion that was incredibly soothing. What your ex did, what your sister says, that's their story, she said, her voice low and certain. It's not your truth. You are not broken. She paused, her gaze intense. You deserve to be seen. The whole, real, complicated you. You deserve to take up space. You deserve to breathe as loud as you want. Her words were a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still open. She wasn't trying to fix me. She was telling me I didn't need fixing. She squeezed my hand gently. I see you, Ilara. And in that moment, I believed her. The fear didn't vanish, but it receded. The shame loosened its grip. In its place, a fragile, tentative hope began to bloom. She leaned forward, her other hand coming up to cut my jaw, her thumb gently wiping a tear from my cheek. Her touch was electric, but it was also safe. The air between us was humming, thick with a year of unspoken longing and a few minutes of shattering truth. Can I? She whispered, her eyes searching mine, asking a question that had nothing to do with our project and everything to do with the rest of our lives. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, a small, jerky movement, and then she closed the distance. Her lips met mine, and it was the softest collision. It was gentle, hesitant at first. A question. It tasted of salt from my tears and the faint sweetness of the tea she'd made in the archive. It was a kiss of pure acceptance. I leaned into it, my hand coming up to tangle in her soft hair, and the kiss deepened, becoming something more, a release, a confirmation, a homecoming. All the tension, all the fear, all the weeks of yearning poured into that single breathtaking point of contact. The fortress I had built was gone, not shattered by force, but willingly dismantled, stone by stone, for her. We ended up on her couch, a tangle of limbs and soft, searching kisses. The frantic energy of the confession had subsided, replaced by a deep, quiet tenderness. The air, once so charged with tension, was now settled and calm. I lay with my head in her lap, her fingers gently tracing patterns on my arm. The rhythmic, soothing touch felt like a promise. For the first time in over a year, the constant, low-grade anxiety that had been my shadow was gone. In its place was a profound sense of peace, a feeling of being exactly where I was supposed to be. "So," I said into the comfortable silence, my voice still a little rough, "about those Venetian maritime laws?" Anya laughed, a low, warm sound that vibrated through her and into me. "I think we can shelve them for the evening." "Probably for the best," I murmured, closing my eyes. "It feels a little complicated, mixing our academic partnership with this." She was quiet for a moment, her fingers stilling on my arm. "We can keep them separate," she said thoughtfully. "We finished the project proposal together, as planned. We're a good team. But for the final papers, we tell Albright we've decided to pursue our arguments independently. No conflict of interest, no weird power dynamics." I opened my eyes and looked up at her. Her solution was so simple, so practical, so typically Anya. It was a concrete action, a way to honor both the connection we had just forged and the professional integrity we both valued. It acknowledged the potential for imbalance and neutralized it with honesty. "That's perfect," I said, a wave of relief and admiration washing over me. "Are you always this sensible?" "Only when the fate of a doctorate is on the line," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "And when it matters." She leaned down and kissed my forehead, a soft, lingering press. "This matters." The future was still a vast unknown territory. My family, my fears, the lingering ghost of Chloe. None of it had magically disappeared. But lying there, in the warm circle of Anya's arms, cocooned in the scent of sandalwood and old books, the future felt less like a threat and more like an invitation. We had navigated the treacherous waters of our own histories and found a safe harbor in each other. We had a plan, not for forever, but for the next step, and for the first time in a very long time, that felt like more than enough. It felt like everything. A few days later, we walked across the main quad, the late autumn sun casting long shadows on the manicured lawns. The air was crisp, smelling of fallen leaves and the distant promise of winter. A week ago, I would have been hurrying, my head down, lost in my own isolated world. But today our pace was slow, unhurried. Anya's hand was in mine, her fingers laced through mine, a warm, solid presence. It was a new, tentative gesture, one we were still getting used to, but it felt more natural than anything I had ever known. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The quiet between us was comfortable now, a shared space of understanding. We passed the library, its stone facade glowing in the afternoon light, and I didn't feel the familiar urge to hide inside it. My sanctuary was no longer made of stone and paper. It was the woman walking beside me. There would be difficult conversations ahead, with my sister, with my own lingering insecurities. But for now, there was just this The simple, profound rightness of her hand in mine, the shared warmth against the autumn chill. It was a quiet beginning. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it was real. When you've spent so long convincing yourself that love is a fortress to be defended, how do you learn to accept it when it comes as an open door? If you've ever found yourself on that terrifying, beautiful threshold, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this story and subscribe for more.